Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to our panel discussion on digital nomad visas. In recent years, the rise of remote work has allowed many people to break free from the traditional office environment and to work anywhere in the world. As a result, the demand for digital nomad visas has increased significantly. These visas allow people to work remotely while traveling to different countries without the need for a traditional work visa. The COVID-19 pandemic has only accelerated the growth of the digital nomad movement, with more companies embracing remote work and many countries looking to attract digital nomads to help stimulate their economies. It has never been a better time to be a digital nomad. However, navigating the world of digital nomad visas can be complex and confusing, with countries having different requirements and regulations. Our panel today includes experts in the field who would share their insights and experiences with digital nomad visas, including the advantages, disadvantages, challenges, do's and don'ts when it comes to digital nomadism or digital nomad visas. We'll also discuss the most popular destinations for digital nomads and how to navigate the visa application processes. We will, in addition, discuss the impact of digital nomads on local communities and economies, as well as the potential challenges faced by digital nomads, such as language barriers, cultural differences, as well as access to reliable internet, which is very crucial when it comes to remote working. Ultimately, our goal is to provide a comprehensive overview of digital nomad visa landscape and to help our audience make informed decisions on whether or not to pursue a digital nomad lifestyle. We hope that our panel discussion today will inspire and empower those who are considering becoming digital nomads or provide valuable insights for those who are already on this exciting journey. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to a very lively and informative session. It is my pleasure to invite and introduce to you our moderator for today, Albert Owusu-Asari, who is also the CEO of Cadana. It is also my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Kathleen DiPaolo and Damola Adegoke.
Cool, yeah, very exciting. We are totally thrilled to have everyone here. Like Esther mentioned, I'm the CEO of Cadana, and we will show a clip very soon, but that's at a high level. What Cadana is, we're a business that allows businesses in the US, Europe, UK, everywhere to pay people anywhere in the world, especially in emerging markets like Africa. Our mission is very simple. We want to make it so that brilliant people everywhere have access to global opportunities. And so, especially as it pertains to remote workers, we also provide financial services, right, for remote workers to be able to pay, receive their salaries, and to be able to also have modern financial services. So without further ado, we'll show a very short clip and then we'll take it from there. Awesome. So yeah, so thanks again for everyone. I see a lot of people trickling in now. Let's introduce our lovely panelists. maybe I'll start with Kathy here. So why don't you talk a bit about yourself, and then we'll go over to Damola.
Sure, yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And I run an online consulting firm. My main clients are actually digital nomads, people who have moved abroad. And I myself have been a digital nomad for over 4 years now. So in my previous role, I was actually a tax lawyer, and I quit that job because I needed to have a break from studying after 7 years, and after living in that corporate life, I needed to take some time off. And quickly I started meeting other entrepreneurs who were on the road, who were asking what I was doing. And I said, well, I used to be a tax lawyer. And everybody said, well, I need help with taxes. Who doesn't need help with, reducing their tax bill? So that's really how I started giving consultations. And now that has expanded to other legalities of moving abroad, such as setting up bank accounts overseas, setting up businesses overseas, residency visas, and even second citizenships, all kind of topics that go together with the whole taxation part and how to figure out your taxes when you do have such an international lifestyle. So yeah, that's basically it. I still do one-on-one consultations. I also have a lot of self-study courses now, and I continue to travel a lot. So that's me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Damola, why don't you also go?
Yeah, my name is Damola. I'm a product designer. I currently do product design at Spotify. But for the most part, I've been doing product design for companies in Nigeria and Africa as a whole, basically helping companies ramp up from 0 to 1. So essentially, you have the products, and then you want to create a product, or you want to create something to put in the hands of your users for the first time to test out. That was like the first 4 or 5 years of my career was about us like ramping things up and doing that. But I think with the pandemic, I think 2020, I think things sort of changed a bit, and it's like, yeah, what more do you want to do with life? Because I spend most of my time in like Lagos, Nigeria. Like, there's more to life, right? Because I spent a lot of time indoors then. It's like, maybe I want to travel the world and see the world a lot more. I think that was the plan before the pandemic started, like early 2020. But then things happened. I couldn't do that as much. And as soon as restrictions got lifted, I started traveling as much as I could. And that's what I've been doing for the past, I guess, 2-3 years, like trying to see as many countries as possible, and also work at the same time because you need money to see these countries. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I do product design, and I love doing product design, and I also love traveling. I love the feeling of taking off and landing. It's beautiful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Super, super exciting. I think, when a lot of us think about digital nomadism, there's various things that come in mind. I just imagine people just hopping from place to place, but I don't understand quite the term digital nomadism. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about what that actually means? Maybe Kathy, you'll start, and Damola can take over.
Yeah, sure. So I think the official definition says something along the lines of location independent people that can work basically from anywhere as long as they've got an internet Wi-Fi connection that works. And I always say to people, it's such a broad definition, so thereby there is really no right or wrong way to be a digital nomad. I know digital nomads who are full-time employed, are remote employees, basically. I know other digital nomads who are freelancers who run their business activities through platforms such as like Upwork, other digital nomads who run their own businesses and have their own freelancers and employees. So there's a huge variety of things one can do as a digital nomad, also regarding the different industries. Nowadays, even people within legal industries or finance industries can work remotely. I remember meeting a guy in Mexico who was actually working for the Bank of America, from his hotel room in Mexico. So it's a huge variety of people that fall under the category of being a digital nomad. And I think before the pandemic, it was very new and people didn't really know what is a digital nomad. I became a digital nomad in 2018. When I told people what I was doing, people would just shake their heads, and be like, yeah, right, that isn't really a thing. And nowadays people have accepted it more, even so far as governments have, launched definitions around it, have launched visas around it and sort of incentives, because they see that actually, yeah, these people are bringing in money. We do have our regular salaries. It's not like we're not doing anything that isn't real, so to speak. So that's for, I guess, being a digital nomad. And then as well, on the other hand, you have the lifestyle that kind of goes with it. And that as well, people can vary in what they prefer. Some people like to travel a lot and see as many countries as possible. Once you're in Europe, you kind of want to tick up as many countries as possible. And other people like to have a home base for 3 to 6 months or even longer than that, where, visas will become really important and deciding which visa you go for. But again, it really is kind of deciding what kind of lifestyle you prefer, what is important in your life, and simply managing your work around that by making sure that you have connection and Wi-Fi that is available. And what I mean by that is, for example, for myself, I really value outdoors, being in nature, going on adventures. So I kind of design my lifestyle with digital nomadism around that. So in winter, in January, I was in Japan snowboarding throughout the mornings, and I would log on in the afternoons, get my work done. And then I went, to New Zealand, did van life travel, went on all these different hikes, and then was still able to be connected in the evenings and afternoons to get my work done. I know other people who really value being close to their families or like their grandmothers, and so they move back home because now the internet and connectivity gives them the option to actually get their work done from anywhere. So it's kind of like being able to choose what's important for you, for your lifestyle right now, and being able to still get your work done around that. So that's what it is kind of to me.
That's awesome. And I feel like I've never heard the words Bank of America and digital nomad in the same sentence. So I think it's very interesting, because I typically would think about like a software engineer, an indie hacker just traveling the world, but it sounds like it's now getting even in the mainstream, right? To an extent.
Definitely.
Well, before I even pass it on to Damola, one of my favorite questions to always ask you is where in the world you are. So you want to tell us a little bit about where you are today?
Yeah, today I'm actually in Switzerland, and tomorrow I'm hopping on an airplane and going to Iceland. So that's that.
That's awesome. Damola, what does that mean for you, right? Like, we're in Lagos. I was brought up in Accra. You were brought up in Lagos. Is there a different perspective here when you think about digital nomadism?
Yeah, I think there's like, not really, but to an extent, like the strategy to it can be slightly different from person to person. But right now I'm currently in Ibadan. I grew up in Ibadan, moved to Lagos for uni, then from Lagos sort of branch around the world. So I came back to like see my family. I think similar to what Kachi mentioned earlier, some people like being close to family from time to time. So I've been away from my family for about a year. So I came back like 2 weeks ago to see my folks, and I'll be going back very soon. But yeah, it differs from person to person. But what I found is like a common feature around everybody is, if your work does not require you to be physically in the office or physically working, say for example, it's probably tough to be a digital nomad and be a doctor. It's probably possible, but it's a little bit tough. But like, if your work doesn't require you to be physically in a place to get work done and you can be anywhere, quite frankly, you could be a digital nomad. Initially, we started with mostly being, I guess, software engineers, designers, like tech people But as time evolves, particularly with the advent of COVID, where people found that you could actually get quality work done in your house without being in the office physically, I guess most companies became a lot more flexible, and then people will be like, yeah, why not just do this, and why not travel and see as many countries as possible, and at the same time continue working at the same time. Yeah, but like, yeah, that's pretty much it for me. It's as long as you can function or do whatever it is you want to do without having to be tied to a physical location, then you're fantastic. As Kati mentioned, internet and a laptop with probably power, and you're good to go.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you mentioned strategy, right? Did you, I mean, we know Kathy started 2018. Like, was this always the plan? Like how does one even begin to think about being a digital nomad, right? So maybe walk us through like your career and the progression of how you got to this place.
Yeah, I think my career it's been pretty linear, like just moving up in some way. But I think my plan to begin traveling started in 2020. And funnily enough, was around the first time I met Albert here. I worked with him on like the first version of Cadana. Cadana is a lot bigger than what it was then now. But what happened then was, prior to that, I was working at the company and I was working in-house, like physically going to the office every single day. And then when the pandemic started, I think I left the company, moved to a new company, and I was freelancing with Albert then. And I realized I could actually get work done in my house. Like I was sitting on my couch and I was getting work done every single day and delivering, right? And that also led to sort of me thinking earlier I was going to travel around. I wanted to see as many Nigerian states as possible. But when COVID happened, that wasn't possible. But I think in like early 2021, when sort of restrictions eased off a bit, I was speaking to a colleague of mine, and he also likes traveling. Funnily enough, he's in Portugal right now. And I was speaking to him, I was like, yeah, I want to leave Nigeria. Like, I want to like broaden my horizon a bit. And he mentioned that he wanted to move to Ghana. But then he said he had been in Kenya before. I was like, yeah, let's go to Kenya together and let's spend a couple of months in Kenya. And we went I think we spent about 4 months there. But what I found when I traveled was, it's particularly coming from Nigeria or coming from Africa generally, where your passport is not as strong, sadly. But what it did for me was it sort of broadened my horizon beyond my country, and it helped me get like the first couple of stamps on my visa, on my passport, right? And so like those visas. And it also made it possible for me to realize that, okay, even in as much as you need a visa to travel to Europe or to like to the Americas or to maybe some Asian countries, there are a lot of visa-free countries in Nigeria, in Africa generally, that let you come in. I think at most you just maybe visa on arrival, and as long as everything checks out, it works out for you. And that was sort of the strategy I took. It made it like going to Kenya sort of opened things up for me a bit, and it made me see the world from a different point of view. Also made it possible for me to see that, yeah, this is possible, and this is the strategy you can take. And I sort of started with that strategy, came back to Nigeria, started applying for jobs because I sort of knew I need to make X amount of money to be able to do all the travel I wanted to do. Started applying for jobs, got my job at Spotify, and then that made it possible for me to travel to the UK. I currently like live in the UK, but I travel to different countries from time to time to sort of pop in and see what's going on there. A funny hobby I realized I sort of picked up that I never knew I loved was hiking. So I stay in London, but I've been to Scotland at least twice within the last 3 months, just for the sole purpose of hiking, because I just wanted to walk, and it feels really good. But yeah, that's it for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome, because I think a couple of takeaways from me were, it's probably good to try to explore different perspectives, move outside. And I'm corporate to this. Like, I'm from Ghana and I hadn't been to any other African country, but I had been to so many other places. So it looks like maybe, we think there's a barrier to go to a place like Kenya, but it might actually be easier, right, than people think.
Yeah, it's a lot easier than people think.
Cool. Awesome. And Kathy, what about you? Like, was this some predetermined thing, from the start, you wanted to be a digital nomad? Or, maybe talk to us about your journey and how the framework in which we should think about this.
Yeah, I actually didn't really know what a digital nomad was until I really became one. I came from a very academic background, from a very professional one where I became a lawyer and all I knew was how to be in a law firm, how to be in that corporate environment. And it wasn't until I felt that I really needed a break, because I had been working for a while and studying at the same time, full time. So I kind of just knew I wanted to get a gap year in, and I had some savings as well. I guess that's always important as well. So, and my first destination was actually Bali, Indonesia. And maybe when you know that Bali, Indonesia is actually a massive digital nomad hub. And it wasn't until I was there and I saw so many people at the cafe shops sitting on their laptops working that I was like, what are they doing? And how are they able to work just from here, in this beautiful surrounding, that I really got curious and started questioning, well, actually, I guess I could do my job online as well. Most of the time I work from the computer in the office. How about I could trial it out somewhere else? And pretty quickly, actually, yeah, by being in a different environment, I think that's also very important. Seeing how different people work and have different businesses operate, I was able to realize, well, I guess I've got already a skill and that I was trained in that I could most definitely do online as well and service people from anywhere, basically. So before I actually left Bali, I already had a new client. So I went back and quit my job and launched basically my, I guess, then freelancing job with my first client. And then it evolved into, building up my own business and having more strategy behind it. But in my opinion, it definitely also pays a lot to, if you're interested in that digital nomad path, the remote working path, to kind of surround yourself more with people who are already doing it, whether that's, if you're not necessarily already ready or can't just yet book a ticket to somewhere like Bali, which is a digital nomad hub, you can at least do it online. There's so many digital nomad Facebook groups. There's a lot of podcasts around digital nomadism, being able to work remotely, and just listening to the different stories and seeing what's actually possible and how people make it work for them, I think is a big light switch moment for everybody that wants to kind of, go a different life path than the one that we are supposed to take, I guess. Or that's how it was for me. Like, I very much thought I would always be an academic or like always a lawyer in the law firm, until I realized there's actually other paths that I can take and that go much more together with my preferred lifestyle, because I couldn't see myself going back anymore into the corporate world where I knew exactly what my next 5 years would kind of look like. I knew exactly, when I would be able to take off holidays, when I could see my family again back home. So I just felt a bit too restricted and wanted a different sort of lifestyle and being able to combine my work around it as well.
That's awesome. That's just incredible. I'm just imagining working right now from Bali, and it sounds it sounds amazing. Now, a little bit about just what I've researched about this topic, right? A lot of people on this call, they get the idea. It seems very pleasant. They just want to know how to get started. It seems to me a prerequisite of all of this is finding some kind of remote type job. Is that correct? Or like, if I wanted to start today, you mentioned a little bit, but is this a case of me finding a job? And if that's true, how do I go about doing that? Maybe anyone can go.
I think one prerequisite is either you find a remote job, or you stash up not a lot of money, but good enough money to do under your travel. But I guess a safer bet is to get a remote job. Most of the jobs I got were from like LinkedIn like the interviews I got was from LinkedIn. Like, funnily enough, is a very good resource. I know about like work at startup, and I know about like Remote OK, like a couple of companies that do these things, like actually handle specifically remote gigs or remote jobs. Another prerequisite is also like, I guess, I think layering on what Kathy mentioned earlier is, I'll just divert a little bit, is that in a world where everything seems to be very, very restrictive, particularly when you're working a 9 to 5, where you know what you do today is the same thing you do tomorrow, and the same thing you do the next day, right? Having a little bit of dynamism in your life, like being able to travel, know that, oh yeah, I'll be like this for the next 1 week, but after 1 week, I'm going somewhere else, sort of gives that tiny spice to life. But yeah, back to the topic is, a good enough prerequisite is like you want to get a remote job, or you want to get some job that lets you not have to be in the office. And then that's a very, very good start. I think maybe Carson might have a bit more insight into like the company.
Especially because I think a lot of the visa applications sort of even require you to prove that you have a job and require you to prove that you can afford to live in that country, right? So Kathy, like if I'm just starting, I mean, Accra, Mexico City, I mean, Lagos, I really want to explore this world. What are some concrete steps I can take in finding a job, for example?
Yeah, I would definitely go on those websites that do have the remote jobs advertised on there. There's plenty of them. I'm sure if you Google one, there will be more than enough that pop up. And as well, the platforms where you can find freelancing jobs, such as, Upwork, Fiverr, they would help as well. Just something that can make sure that you receive regular income. That is what usually is the most important thing, especially if you're going for visas. You need to show some reoccurring revenue. The best option or the simplest option would usually be to have a remote employment, to have a contract in place that shows that, yes, you are secured, you're not going to take away basically someone else's job wherever you're trying to get. So that would be the safest thing to do, because I think the other route would usually be, to become a freelancer who then builds up their own business. And that would usually take a little bit more time, I would say, until you're able to get out a salary of your own business and show those bank statements that you are drawing a salary from your own business. So, and that's the same for me. I actually, for me, it wasn't just like I decided to become a digital nomad and I went all in with my business. It was very much a gradual step of, okay, I've got now one client. What am I gonna bring in next month? And I started going on those freelancing platforms, and I actually did a few random jobs. Like I remember I was proofreading PhD thesis for people. I was still writing government grants. I was like a government grants writer for an office that was located in another country as well. So that's how I kind of brought in reoccurring revenue until I felt like, okay, I'm ready to, start up my own thing and go all in. But yeah, I guess at the beginning, if you're very much at the beginning, don't put too much pressure on yourself to be like, I have to have this all figured out. It's a gradual thing. If you can find a remote employment, it's definitely going to be your safest bet and the one that can set you up, for a lot of success, especially if you're trying to go abroad and get a visa elsewhere.
That's awesome. And so say that I've been able to figure out a remote job, and I know the first step. You mentioned Bali earlier. Are there like some countries that are generally open to digital nomads, just from your experience, that maybe you can tell us a little bit more about those countries?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, now we have the privilege to be in a time and place where governments have actually launched digital nomad visas. There are over 50 different digital nomad visas in place. What those digital nomad visas mean is you are employed by a foreign company. It can be you have an employer or it's actually your own company that is set up elsewhere, you can show reoccurring revenue. The amount of how much that reoccurring revenue needs to be can vary a lot from country to country. For example, some Eastern European countries have a much lower requirement than Iceland, for example, where I'm going tomorrow, has a digital nomad visa as well, where you need to make at least 7,000 euros or something like that per month. Whereas, you know, Eastern Europe, it's 2,500 euros per month, much lower. So requirements vary a lot, but yes, there's a multitude of digital nomad visas out there. And as well, there are some countries where it's just naturally easier, I would say, to get a second residency in that is not even necessarily labeled as digital nomad visa, but it's just like a temporary visa or a visa where you can show that you're self-sufficient. The goal of it always being that you're not moving somewhere to find employment in that country. You're already covered and no one basically needs to look after you, or the system doesn't need to look after you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And Damola, I know that, you know, when we have had these conversations in the past, we have friends that are usually, they check all the boxes, but there's just some mental barrier of getting started. Do you know from personal experience, just friends that have, you know, gone this route, and what kinds of countries have you seen them go to?
Yeah, coming from Nigeria, I've seen folks go to Germany. I think Germany is a lot more restrictive now, but I know that Portugal, in fact, I have two friends that have got visas to Portugal over like the last month or two. Portugal has a very, very good program that they set up. As long as you can prove that you earn X amount of money and you've been earning it for a particular period of time, it takes a bit of time to get it, particularly coming from Nigeria, but it's very possible. I know Spain also has one, and if you go to Spain, you'd absolutely love yourself, because if you're coming from Nigeria, coming from a West African country, it feels somewhat similar. It's warm, the climate is beautiful. Yeah, I think those two countries I'm very, very certain about. The UK has some form of it, but what sort of the UK currently has that's very, very popular is the global talent visa. But what it does for you is that once you leave Africa or leave Nigeria, you get, or even Ghana, you get access to get easier visas to other European countries, like getting the Schengen visa, like just visiting, and then you can use that for however long you book your travel for. Typically, I always advise for people to go to get a visa for a country that is in the Schengen region generally, because it then gives you access to travel to as many countries as possible without having to go through extra visa process, particularly when you come with a weak passport. But yeah, that's one very, very great advice I always give, is like, yeah, get one for Portugal or get one for Spain, and then what it does for you is that you can then travel to as many European countries as possible. In terms of getting started, I think with a bunch of things in life is like, you can plan everything, but if you don't take that plunge, quite frankly, you just have to try it out. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work out. But the quiet is that you don't really know until you actually like just jump into the river and see whether you swim. More often than not, you would swim. And if you don't swim, you get out and you swim, you try it again, right? But the quiet is that as long as you meet most of the criteria, most of these things are available online. So you need some level of advice, but you don't need somebody to hold your hand constantly. But you need advice on like, oh, how was like the tax laws here? Like sometimes you can find those things online, right? I think one of the most critical things for European countries is taxes. If you clear those things and clear the barrier for those things, you're typically fine. And countries always have like a restriction of like, if you don't spend X amount of time here, you're not tax liable in that country. So find those things out and find out to make sure that you're not, maybe you don't eventually become a tax resident in the country if you stay for too long. And if you do stay for too long and you want to become a tax resident, and that's still fine. Otherwise, you're within the boundaries of the law, then you're fine. But most of this information is online. You'll always find it. Spend a couple of hours reading through it, and they try their best to make it as clear as possible. And if you make a particular amount of money and you can prove it, as Kathy mentioned earlier, like you can prove that you've been making the amount of money for a period of time, and it shows you have a contract to show for it, you have a valid passport to show for it, more often than not, you apply and you get a response. And when you get a positive response, and if you don't get a positive response, they give you reasons for the response that you get, and then you can go back and iterate on those things and get your I guess documents more in shape, and then you go again for it.
Awesome. Talking about swimming, let's dive into taxes, right? So you are the tax expert, right? From my understanding of some of the things you do for clients, you're able to kind of guide them around the tax implications of this lifestyle. For me personally, I would admit that is one mental barrier that I have. It's just, hey, am I overcomplicating my life by being around all these countries? So why don't you tell us a little bit about tax implications, if any, and what are some smart tax decisions that people should be making for this lifestyle?
Yeah, Damola already mentioned one of the most important concepts, that is tax residency. And tax residency basically means where you are considered to be a resident of, usually the place where we call home. Where do you spend the most amount of time in? And that is usually the place where you're supposed to be paying taxes. Now, with an international lifestyle, with moving abroad, that obviously becomes more trickier in finding out which country actually has the right to tax you. And with that as well, there is some sort of general rules that says if you stay longer than 6 months, you usually trigger tax residency and you need to start paying taxes in a country. It's a very broad general rule. It doesn't always apply because there are so many exceptions to the rule. But it's a good kind of figure to keep in mind that, you know, if you start staying in one place for a longer period of time, you most likely will have to pay some taxes, unless there is an exception to it, such as Portugal, you know, has tax incentive programs in place. It's called the NHR program, non-habitual program. Non-habitual residency program that gives you a special tax rate. Spain has just now as well brought out one for digital nomads who get the digital nomad visa. And in other circumstances, like Croatia and Malta, they actually won't tax digital nomads on their personal income because they assume that you're paying taxes elsewhere, because a digital nomad visa is usually only limited for a certain amount of time. Usually it's 1 year and you can keep renewing it. So there are a few digital nomad visas out there that actually come with quite some tax benefits, just meaning that you get that visa and you won't be taxed in the country that you're going for that short amount of time that you're going there. And it would be a good idea, I guess, from a tax point of view, to look at those digital nomad visas that give you those tax incentives. But as well, something that I've noticed with remote workers is you oftentimes want to keep in mind your employer, because at the end of the day, they're kind of the ones that determine if you're allowed to work remotely to start with, where you're allowed to work remotely from, and, you know, how long you're allowed to stay in one place as well. It's super important, especially for remote workers, to keep an honest conversation with their employer to know those sort of things, because believe it or not, but for employers, there's massive tax implications and compliance burdens that fall on them when they have remote employees. And so it's not uncommon that some employers will let their people only work remotely if they keep their home address and if they keep being registered in their old home country, even though they're not there anymore. But they simply want to make sure, okay, you're still within that system, you're still paying taxes somewhere, and we keep paying your payroll there. Other remote employers might be more flexible, and they might say, okay, you know what, you're allowed to go and work remotely from anywhere as long as you register as a freelancer in the country. So then they will want to see that you actually registered. Usually freelancer registrations can be super simple, especially like in places like the UK and elsewhere in Europe. It's just, you know, you registered, you get a tax ID number and start paying taxes on whatever you're making. And as long as you have the documentation to show to your employer, it usually keeps them happy as well. Or then also another very popular solution for employers is that they actually employ the remote workers through what is called employer of record. Cadana Pay now has, I guess, a similar service to that. Yeah. Takes off all the obligations and compliance burdens of the employers of them, and they let someone else handle it so that they can actually give the opportunities to their remote workers to just work from anywhere or from certain places. So lots of different considerations to think about. The most important one is your tax residency. Where do you trigger your taxes? Which country will have the right to actually tax you? And are there certain countries that are able to offer you tax exemptions where they say, you know what, we won't tax you for this short amount of time and you're cool to be here. If you go over a longer certain period of time, chances are you might have to eventually pay taxes where you actually are at. But it's a good idea to keep those countries in mind, you know, the ones that offer great tax incentives and also ones that already have very low taxes. I also know quite a few Africans that go to Dubai where, you know, life is completely tax-free. There's no taxes at all. So those are some good options.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm just going to shamelessly plug Cadana. You know, just like Kathy said, she's the expert, but we also offer the employer of record service. And so if you're here and you're concerned and your employer might be open to the idea, but wants to make sure they do things correctly, you could always speak to a company like us to help you with that. So that said, you know, part of, I guess, my job broadly as the CEO of a payroll business is to think a lot about the future, right? What does the future of work actually look like? What kinds of services can we be given to our customers? How do we help them? And I'm sure you both have thought about what you think the future is, but can you tell us a little bit about specifically with digital nomadism or broadly work in general, where you think we're headed and sort of how can people strategically think about this future as individuals? So maybe Damola, why don't you start and then we'll pass it back to Kathy.
Yeah, I'll talk about also things more in the future of work, and I'll talk about like my first experience trying to relocate. I think future of work is a world where work is not where you work, but more around like the people you work with and how you do the work, right? It doesn't really have to be a case of you having to be in an office doing the work. I assume Albert here is probably in the US right now, and then he's typically in Ghana and shuffling the US and Ghana from time to time. When I worked with, I've never met Albert before, and we worked for like about 6 months together, and work got done. And right now we've not met anybody on this call, and we're getting some form of work done, or we're meeting each other and having a conversation. And at the end of the day, a bunch of work is like a huge chunk of work is conversations, and like the actual work is maybe max 3-4 hours every day. But like more often than not, you're just aligning and talking to people to make sure that we're all on the same page at the end of the day, right? So yeah, future work is probably a world where you don't have to be where you're working. You can work from anywhere, and then you can work with anybody. At my current company, everybody I work with actively on projects is not even in the same country with me. Sometimes they're not in the same time zone. More often than not, they're in the US, and then I'm in London or I'm in some other country, and we get work done in some way, right? And that's what's important. From like my first-hand experience trying to relocate to the UK, I'll say one of the things that is probably important that we begin to work on, and I feel like Cadana can probably slot into it, is maybe having a lot more empathy from the point of view of people are trying to relocate or trying to immigrate somewhere else, right? or trying to migrate somewhere else. The reason is that like I work with a company while I was like my company worked with a company, and they assumed I knew everything that was going on, but I didn't know what was going on. I was like, oh, you need to do this and get this spreadsheet. I was like, I don't know what this means, right? Explain further. And then it takes like a day for them to respond to me. But if there was a place where a bunch of these things were properly documented and maybe you reach out to somebody and the person gives you enough of an understanding as opposed to like just doing checklists of like, yeah, we've told you this, we've told you this, we've told you this. Bye-bye. You'll figure it out by yourself, right? It feels like, I feel that would be a lot better, right? Because like, there was just a lot of ambiguity, a lot of things I'm still figuring out around my tax and tax residency. Yeah, I think those things can be helpful down the line in terms of like just making all those ambiguous things fairly clear to people. I know a bunch of countries or governments are trying their best to do that, like creating as much documentation as possible on their government websites or on their visa websites. But yeah, down the line, it's something that we need to like streamline. If businesses pop up, I think it is doing the work, and I think Cadana is also down the line trying to expand into things like that. I would assume. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's awesome. And Kathy, what about you?
The future of work. Yeah, well, I only see it growing and growing more, this trend, and obviously not just in, America or Europe, but also shifting to other places like the African continent, South American continent, and just giving people way more opportunities and possibilities too. And on the other hand as well, being able to have more legal structures around it as well. We're seeing new laws being created around remote work. I think specifically in Portugal, Netherlands has already released some regulation around, people should have the right to be able to work remotely and whatnot. And I'm sure there's only going to be more of that, which will also mean that people will have more security around that being actually a potential path of line of work. And yeah, I guess I'm just really excited to see the growth and also the shifts that happen in people's personal life, from families that are able to live much more relaxed because now they're able to actually go and pick up their kids from school, families relocating out of the cities and moving back into suburbs or into nature, which is, inflicting completely on like geographical locations and new cities that are starting to appear, and even those new digital nomad hubs that are appearing in Portugal. I mean, Portugal 9-10 years ago was not necessarily a big place on the map, but now it seems that everybody wants to be in Portugal, and likewise in other places that are starting to pop up around the world that are trying to attract more of like remote workers and people who can make money from everywhere. So it's a very exciting time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we feel similar. When we talk to, policymakers, especially on the African continent, I think it's also an opportunity for governments to attract, money literally into these countries. And because, when you are working in a coffee shop, right, you're transacting, you're buying coffee, you're, participating in the local economy. So I think even from that perspective of like, it can actually be a different form of tourism if they actually create these policies that encourage that. So we're extremely excited for us at Cadana, and we want to make sure that we are building that infrastructure, like Damola said, to make it easy for employers to basically do this, and for you, Kathy, to make it easy for people to understand tax implications and things of that sort. I know we're coming to the end of the time here, and this has been like a fantastic conversation. But how do people get in touch with you all? Do you have a Twitter handle, websites? Maybe Kathy, you can start, and then Damola as well.
Yeah, I mostly hang out on Instagram, actually. It's at wanderers.wealth. I also have LinkedIn profile, Kathleen Di Paolo. You'll find me on there as well. And I really love to communicate with my community. So if you want to shoot me a message on LinkedIn or on Instagram and just say hi, you know, like on what path you are on, feel free to do so. I'm always like on my stories, sharing stories from other people. And if someone has a good resource, I try and share it. So I'm always on there giving people the good places where to go and reliable resources as well.
Yeah, for me, my name, I think on LinkedIn, my name is Adegoke Damola. Like typically, once you search for it, you probably would find it. My face is there. And then on Twitter and Instagram, I use Instagram, but like just for interaction, but I'm more active on Twitter. It's the THE_speakable. So it's like THE_SPEAKEKABLE. And then if you shoot me a DM, I typically try my best to respond to as many as possible. But yeah, very open to it.
That's awesome. And maybe we'll leave it up to the audience. Maybe you can put in the chat if you have any questions, and then we can take the next few minutes to answer them. But thank you all. It's been a good talk.
I already saw the Q&A button, and I saw one that is very interesting that I think maybe we can attack. It says, looks like nomadism is expensive with all the traveling. How much should I be earning on average to be able to be a nomad? And that's a very fair point, because I get that question a lot, you know, like how much should you be earning? And to be honest, I feel like the advantage as well with being a digital nomad is you can kind of use geo arbitrage to your advantage, meaning that because you can work from anywhere, you can choose the locations you go to. So you can choose a cheaper country over a more expensive country. And I know so many people who, you know, when they have a tight budget, when they need to look or need to save more money, they choose a cheaper country like somewhere in South America, or even, you know, if they are within Europe, it's probably going to be cheaper in rural Portugal than it would be in Germany or in Switzerland. So because you're able to work from anywhere, you really can use that to your advantage. And obviously, depending on your time of stay, that you can stay in one place as well. Like if you can stay for 3 months in one place or 6 months, you can usually get a better rental price than if you're moving every 2 weeks and need to stay at more expensive hotels. So use that to your advantage. And, you know, I know digital nomads who make around 2,000 euros and they get by well, and I know others who make more, and therefore they seem to also maybe move around a bit more and have to less budget on the places that they choose to stay and for how long they stay.
That's awesome. Let's see, any other questions here? Maybe Damola and Kathy we can take.
Yeah, I think there's a question from Raimat. She mentioned that she tried to apply for the Portuguese visa, but then there is no visa appointment date. I think with the congestion of travel within, particularly from Nigeria, it's very hard to find appointment date for like the next 6 months. But what I also found is that people tend to cancel the appointments like fairly closer to the appointments, right? So if you have all your documents ready, you want to check as often as possible, say every other day. And then as long as you have all your documents ready, have everything to pay or sort of process your appointment, check as often as possible. Typically those things will pop up. And when they pop up, just take advantage of that timing and like just run with it, right? I guess like preparation meets opportunity meets preparation. So prepare everything and then keep checking. It's a little bit tricky and it can be quite stressful, if we're being honest. Even from being in the UK right now, like trying to get a Schengen visa is even difficult because you have to book a month, 2 months ahead. And then, yeah, so people cancel their appointments, and as they cancel them, just take advantage of it and just, I guess, move. But yeah, I want to also address something that Kat mentioned, which is that one other advantage of being a digital nomad is that more often than not, you get the ability to plan your travel way ahead of time, right? So with being able to plan your travel way ahead of time means that you can either book the place you want to stay 3-4 months down the line. And that means it's a lot cheaper than booking it a week before you move. Also is that in certain countries, you can move within countries without having to fly. You can use train. And that also like makes things fairly cheaper. And the fact that you're booking your train or booking your flights way like more often than not, like 3 to 6 months before you actually have to do that travel means that you are getting it at a fairly cheaper price, right? So in as much as it might seem expensive, there are tactics you can use to make yourself get the best value for your money also. And then Kathy also mentioned there are a lot of beautiful countries you could go to that are fairly cheaper, where if you're in dollars, you're getting a lot more value for your money if you go to those countries. Yeah.
That's awesome. I guess my favorite question in this panel is someone said, is it possible to maintain a kid or kids with this lifestyle? You know, I guess stereotypically it sounds like the youthful person party on the beach. But Kathy, maybe through just traveling and meeting people, have you met people with families with kids, and how did they make it work?
Yeah, I've met many families with kids who make it work. I would say there's a lot more organization behind it, definitely. But yeah, I think there's even now, you know, there's a whole new economy that is starting to appear around digital nomads, and even more so digital nomad families, because people have realized it's not just single people who travel alone who have remote jobs, but it's actually now even, you know, older people who have well-established jobs that have been given the opportunity to work from anywhere, and they usually also have really great salary packages, and therefore they would like to work from anywhere. So there's co-living, co-working spaces that are starting to pop up that are, you know, including for kids, that have even like nurseries next to the co-working space, that give the opportunity to leave the child there while you're working. There's, I think Boundless Life is one of the bigger companies that I know that organizes like full-on semester-long programs or terms where families stay in one place and then move for the next term to another country under a certain schooling program. So definitely there's plenty of solutions out there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we're unfortunately at time, but look, I wanted to say a big thank you to Kathy and Damola. You know, a lot of the folks on this call, including myself, we've learned a lot, and we're extremely grateful, right, for your time. So we will end it here, but we'll find Kathy, you can find Damola on all of the platforms they shared. And then, you know, we'll also make this video available on YouTube for anyone that's interested. But thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Hey, so soon we're at the end of this webinar. As we're concluding our panel discussion today on digital nomad visas, we really want to extend a big thank you to our panelists, Kathleen and then Damola. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your expertise and your insights on this very, very important topic. Now, before we wrap up, we'd like to share you know, highlight what Cadana is doing to make sure that this digital nomadism movement is going on, you know, how we're contributing in our own little way. And for that, we are going to be sharing a short clip to highlight some of the activities or some of the work that we're doing in that regard. Thank you.